Veterans are susceptible to asbestos exposure and developing cancer later in life because it's an industrial job. You might not think of that in terms of, if you're in the Navy or the Air Force or the Army, that it's an industrial job, because obviously you're serving your country and you're protecting your country. But the equipment that you work with is operating to certain specifications, and it has to be able to be fireproof and withstand certain temperatures, and asbestos was used by civilian contractors as the go-to material to protect and insulate military equipment for all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. For example, if you're in the Navy, it might be your machinist mate classification or your boiler tender, and that's going to be the equivalent of a civilian machinist or boiler maker, but they're just doing it on a ship instead. In the Air Force, it's going to be your aviation mechanics, because they're working on planes that have used asbestos to both insulate systems, but also for their braking materials they have for the planes. For the Coast Guard, it's going to be similar to the Navy in that they're operating these ships in many cases, and people may not know this, but the Coast Guard also operates significantly in our Great Lakes. And those Great Lakes, as well as the type of patrolling that they might do in the northern latitudes, you have to deal with ice breaking. So they're going to have icebreakers, but they're also going to have boilers on board to try to melt that ice on the ship and around the ship. And that, in many cases, those were insulated with asbestos. So, each branch has its own exposures. For the Army, it's going to be your open wheel mechanics, and then also people who, created these Army bases, where you're basically going to have the same type of exposure as a construction worker in the civilian economy, except you're building these bases around the world. The Marines are going to be exposed because of where they serve. They're serving on military bases, they're serving aboard ships, and in some cases, Marines are tasked with the maintenance of, let's say, the helicopters that they serve aboard. And so one of their classifications is they're going to be a machinist aboard the helicopter that they also will serve aboard. I've had the honor of representing people who served in World War II, in the Korean conflict, in the Vietnam War, basically in every instance and location where the U.S. military was from World War II until the present. But I would say most of the exposure is going to be, again, from World War II until about 1980. And part of the reason for that is a lot of the asbestos was being removed in the 70s and 80s. It doesn't mean that exposure didn't happen after that. So if you or a loved one has a diagnosis that maybe came from a post-80 timeframe, you should still talk to us about it, because one of the things that I think surprises our clients is that we already have a lot of the records that we need in order to prove this case. We already have the records for the American military base in Heidelberg, Germany, Patrick Henry Village. We already have the ship schematics for the USS Enterprise, if someone served aboard that, or the USS Black Hawk, a destroyer tender. So we don't have to relearn this stuff. All we have to do is apply where you or your loved one served and figure out if there was asbestos there and when it was there.